The story begins where the river bends, a slow brown current cutting through Jefferson Parish, Louisiana. Locals call it the Black River Road, though there's no river and no map that names it, only a dirt path that ends where a house once stood, burned to its foundations before the Civil War began. They say the fire burned blue that night. Children used to dare each other to walk the road after sunset, to listen for the sound of women singing, soft, almost prayerful, but wrong in rhythm. No words, just a hum that vibrated through the cane fields. In 1838, parish records list the property as belonging to Aurelia Klein, a widow in her late 20s. No husband, no heirs, yet tax ledgers show over 24 occupants labeled domestics, every one of them female. Every one of them under 16. For decades, the Klein house was spoken of in fragments, a place of charity, a home for the wayward. The church praised it. The courts funded it. The community stayed silent. When the Union Army advanced in 1863, the Klein property was mysteriously excluded from destruction orders. Officers later claimed it was already dealt with, yet no official report ever described what they found inside. By 1900, the location was erased from state maps. But oral histories kept the memory alive. Tales of girls bought from auction blocks at impossible ages, raised in purity, and vanished before adulthood. The old women of Jefferson Parish still say the soil won't grow there, that it smells of sweet ash after rain. No one rebuilt on that land. But in the archives of St. Landry Parish, one document remains intact. Aurelia Klein, registered proprietor, House of Blessed Comfort, 1838, below her name, one line handwritten in faded ink, for those whom obedience redeems. They came before dawn, always before dawn. Wagons that carried no markings, moving quietly through the fog. The horses were wrapped in cloth to muffle their hooves, and the drivers never spoke. Neighbors claimed they were delivering orphans, children of mixed blood rescued from plantations, victims of war or daughters of the fallen, but no one ever saw them leave. Each wagon brought 2, sometimes 3 girls. The youngest recorded was 9. They were small, silent, eyes wide as if taught not to look at the sky. When the sun rose, the wagons were gone, leaving only the sound of the marsh settling back into itself. The woman who received them, Aurelia Klein, was known for her composure. Neighbors described her as kind, devout, disciplined. She never raised her voice, never smiled too wide. She wore mourning black long after her husband's death, though no one had ever seen proof he existed. Inside her home, the girls were given white dresses and new names from the Bible: Ruth, Esther, Miriam, Sarah. They were baptized in a stone basin imported from France, its rim carved with Latin inscriptions that no one in the parish could translate. Visitors described the Klein house as immaculate. The air smelled faintly of lavender and ash. The parlor walls were lined with portraits, not of family, but of anonymous young women painted in identical poses, eyes lowered, hands folded at the chest. When asked what happened to the girls after their redemption, Aurelia would only say, "They go to better homes." No one questioned her further. In the South of 1839, charity was not interrogated, especially when blessed by the church. But the ledgers tell another story. One column marked donations received, another marked settlements made. Each name crossed out after a year, each amount higher than the last, and in the margin beside one entry from 1841, in Aurelia's distinct hand, obedience fulfilled. Transition complete. By 1840, the House of Blessed Comfort had become more than a residence. Once it was an institution. Church bulletins called it a place for reform and refinement. Local judges sent wayward girls there instead of to the jails. Parish families donated linens, candles, even silver, believing they were serving God's mercy. On paper, the house was a miracle. In whispers, it was something else. Travelers who stayed in nearby inns spoke of strange sounds in the night, hymns without melody, rhythmic thuds from beneath the floorboards, and the unmistakable scent of burning sugar that drifted through the fog. No one ever saw the girls outside the gates again. Aurelia ran the place with the precision of a convent. Every morning began with prayers, sewing lessons, and recitations. The girls were not allowed to look at mirrors. Every reflective surface in the house was draped in cloth. Meals were silent. Visitors were rare, but when they came, they were always men of standing. Plantation owners, merchants, clergy. They stayed for hours in the upstairs parlor where the curtains were nailed shut. After they left, Aurelia would gather the girls and lead them in what she called the liturgy of renewal. Witnesses said the chants sounded like Latin, but no priest could identify the phrases. The parish priest, Father Givens, once asked to visit during service. Aurelia declined politely, saying, "Our prayers are not for men to hear." Still, her reputation only grew. Donations poured in. Officials began referring to her as Madame Klein, a title she neither accepted nor denied. But something in the air around the house began to change. Birds stopped nesting in the trees. The well water turned the color of rust. Workers hired to repair the roof refused to stay past sunset. And one spring morning, when the fog rolled in thicker than ever before, a fisherman claimed he saw small white figures walking across the riverbank, barefoot, heads bowed, heading toward the house that no longer cast a shadow. In 1841, the parish clerk of Jefferson received a package wrapped in oilcloth and sealed with wax. Inside was a bound ledger, the first of what would later be known as the Klein Registers. Accounting books filled with immaculate handwriting, every line dated, every expense justified. At first glance, it appeared ordinary. Purchases of flour, candles, sewing materials, and medicine, but between the domestic details were entries that made no sense. Preparation water, 6 barrels. Right garments, 12 pieces. Tithes for transition, completed. At the bottom of each page, Aurelia Klein's signature gleamed in dark ink, followed by a small cross. The clerk filed the ledger under charitable institutions, unaware that what he held was closer to a map, a precise chronology of disappearances written in the language of faith. Later copies would reveal 48 names, each belonging to a girl between the ages of 10 and 14. Every name was accompanied by a phrase: redeemed, relocated, renewed. None of the girls were ever located again. The ledger itself was a contradiction. Numbers too neat, ink too fresh. When archivists examined it decades later, the pages still carried the faint scent of smoke, as if something had been burned close by but never touched the paper. A note, wedged between 2 entries, was written in a different hand. Smaller, unsteady. Do they know what awaits them? Does she? The handwriting didn't match Aurelia's. Some believe it belonged to one of her assistants, a woman named Maribel Shaw, who vanished in the winter of 1842. Rumor holds that Maribel tried to leave the house one night, carrying the ledger with her. She was found 2 miles away, lying face down in the marsh, her skin white as wax, her hands clasped around a rosary that wasn't hers. When officials came to collect the body, Aurelia met them at the gate. She told them calmly, she broke the vow of obedience. No one asked which vow she meant. In the spring of 1842, Father Givens delivered a sermon unlike any the parish had heard before. It was brief, hesitant, and spoken in the trembling voice of a man, trying to convince himself he warned of false sanctuaries built on the bones of devotion. He spoke of women who wear holiness as a veil for hunger. His congregation shifted uneasily in their pews. The following week, Father Givens was reassigned to Baton Rouge. The diocese offered no explanation. His replacement, Father Lemoyne, praised Aurelia Klein in his very first sermon, calling her an angel of reform sent to guide the wayward. That same month, the bells of the parish church began ringing at odd hours. Midnight, dawn sometimes 3 times before stopping abruptly. The sexton swore he found the ropes swinging on their own. In her journals, Aurelia wrote often about sound. She described the hum of order, the rhythm of purity, and the choir that lives beneath obedience. Scholars later debated whether these were metaphors or delusions. One entry stood out among the rest. The silence is never empty. When they sing, the walls breathe. After that spring, no one saw Aurelia attend Sunday service again. The girls of her house no longer appeared in public, not even for donations or blessings. Yet the house remained busy, lights burning through the night, carriages arriving without notice, and faint harmonies echoing through the fog long after the carriages departed. Locals began calling it the house that prays when no one listens. In 1843, an itinerant preacher traveling through Jefferson Parish claimed he saw a line of girls standing in the field outside the Klein house, all wearing identical veils. He waved. None of them moved. When he returned the next morning, the field was empty, but in the soft mud by the fence he counted 14 pairs of footprints that led toward the door and never came back out. The record of what happened on the night of candles survives only in fragments: a sheriff's report with half its lines blackened, a farmer's letter to his brother, and one brittle page from a diary whose author remains unknown. On the evening of May 12, 1843, a glow appeared above the marshlands east of Jefferson Parish. Witnesses said it looked like hundreds of candles burning in a circle, steady and windless, their light visible for miles. When deputies rode out to investigate, they found the gates of the House of Blessed Comfort wide open. The air smelled of salt and honey. The house itself was silent. Every window blazed with light, but inside no flame was found. The parlor was arranged as if for ceremony. Dozens of chairs faced a single wooden altar draped in white cloth. On it sat a single object, a basin carved from stone, filled to the rim with water that shimmered like mercury. In the fireplace, the ashes formed patterns too precise to be accidental. Circles within circles, each marked with Latin words for obedience, purity, return. Aurelia Klein was nowhere to be seen of the girls. Only one trace remained: a small handprint pressed into the wall beside the altar, as if someone had leaned there while the plaster was still wet. The deputies sealed the property and rode back at dawn. By the time they returned with reinforcements, the house had gone dark. The candles, if they ever existed, had melted into the soil, leaving nothing but faint impressions like rings left by jars. That week, church bells across the parish rang continuously for 7 hours without a hand touching them. The priests called it divine warning. Locals called it something else. They said the house had completed its prayer, and the silence that followed was the answer. 3 days after the night of candles, a team of parish officers returned to the Klein estate under orders to document what had occurred. The sheriff's report, filed on May 15, 1843, still exists, though most of it is written in trembling, uneven script, as if the hand that wrote it couldn't stay steady. The property was found in state of unusual quiet. No life present, the air heavy with sweet vapor as from candle grease. Structure remains, but all interior markings appear altered. Walls pale as bone. No trace of soot or fire. The men described hearing a low resonance beneath the floors. Not quite a voice. Not quite a hum. As if the house itself still remembered the sound of prayer. Every portrait in the parlor had changed. The girls' faces, once painted with eyes downcast, now appeared to be looking directly outward. Some of the officers claimed the expressions had shifted slightly between one glance and the next. The sheriff dismissed it as nerves, but his report includes the note: order re-examined, but eyes differ. In the basement, they discovered a second stone basin identical to the one found upstairs. Its water was gone, leaving only a residue that shimmered like oil. One deputy, who attempted to scrape it for evidence, developed blisters across his palms within hours. When the investigation concluded, the property was sealed. The report ended with the line, "No occupants found. Presumed abandoned." 2 weeks later, that same sheriff resigned, moved north, and was never heard from again. His replacement, a man named Cyrus Dodd, ordered the Klein house boarded up and placed under parish control. He claimed the site would be cleansed by prayer and time, but within the year, vines covered the walls, the roof collapsed inward, and the road leading there began to sink into the marsh. Locals stopped calling it the House of Blessed Comfort. They called it simply the Listening House. By the late 1840s, Jefferson Parish had learned to stop speaking the name Klein. The house, half swallowed by the swamp, was fenced off and left to rot. Floods came and went, erasing the road, softening the ground until it seemed the land itself wanted to forget. But forgetting is never simple. Officially, the House of Blessed Comfort became an administrative footnote, charitable property dissolved under Act 1844. Reason: environmental decay. The ledgers, registers, and correspondence vanished into diocesan storage, mislabeled or misplaced. Only fragments surfaced: receipts for hymn paper, white veils, travel arrangements for renewal. Aurelia Klein's name was erased from public record. No death certificate, no burial. It was as if she had been unmade. Yet every few years someone reported hearing the hum again. That low, sustained tone that rolled across the marsh like wind through hollow wood. Travelers described it as human, others as mechanical, but all agreed it carried a strange harmony, as if many voices were breathing in unison. In 1851, a painter passing through Louisiana sketched the ruins from memory. His notebook, discovered a century later, contained a single annotation beside the drawing. Windows gone, light still inside. The parish priest who replaced Father Lemoyne refused to bless the site. He called it a shrine to confusion. Still, on certain nights, he swore he saw small glimmers among the reeds, pale as candlelight, moving in patterns too deliberate to be tricks of reflection. The community learned to build around the silence. Crops grew closer to the marsh again. Children were warned never to wander there. The next generation thought it was only a legend, and so the parish healed the only way it knew how, by forgetting the shape of its own sin. But even forgotten things leave fingerprints. And when the century turned and surveyors came to reclaim the land, their shovels struck something solid beneath the soil, not stone, not bone, but wood, carved smooth by human hands, the first piece of the house that refused to stay buried. In 1904, Louisiana's new flood control program demanded the marshlands of Jefferson Parish be dredged and drained. The workers came with shovels, drills, and dynamite, men who'd never heard of Aurelia Klein or the House of Blessed Comfort. By the second week, their machinery jammed on something deep below the soil. Not roots, not rock, but the edge of a structure buried in sediment. They cleared away the mud and found an entire foundation preserved like a coffin. The bricks were blackened but whole, the floors arranged in perfect symmetry. It was a house built to last, and to hide. Among the debris, they uncovered fragments of porcelain, a rusted gate latch, and dozens of glass vials sealed with wax. Inside each vial was a strip of parchment no longer legible, the ink bled away by moisture. Only one remained intact enough to read a single word: renewed. When word reached the parish office, officials ordered the dig halted. The foreman, a man named Albert Renard, ignored the command and continued for another day. That night, according to his crew, Renard began muttering in his sleep. He repeated one phrase over and over in a slow, rhythmic whisper: "The song has no end." He left camp before dawn and was never seen again. The work resumed under new management, but every attempt to clear the site met resistance. Tools broke. Machines stalled. The ground, dry for years, suddenly filled with standing water. Local newspapers ran a short column calling it the Singing Marsh Incident. The article concluded with a strange detail. At noon, The water surface vibrated as if struck by sound, though no noise was heard. After that, the project was abandoned. The site was reclassified as a protected wetland, but a field journal from one engineer found decades later records something the newspaper did not: a hand-drawn sketch of what they found beneath the main hall. A circle of wooden chairs facing inward, each carved with a single word: obedience. The relics recovered from the marsh were transferred to the Jefferson Parish Evidence Room in the summer of 1905. There they sat, unlabeled, undocumented, and largely forgotten. Only the wooden circle was logged under ritual furniture unidentified origin. Decades later, during a 1929 inventory, archivist Eliza Boudreau rediscovered the box. She described its contents in her field notes: 12 chairs, each identical in shape but carved with different words: purity, faith, renewal, silence, redemption. The final chair bore no inscription at all, only the faint trace of letters sanded away. When Boudreau touched it, she noted a sensation of warmth, as though the wood had been sitting in sunlight. She dismissed it as imagination. But that night she dreamed of a room filled with whispering voices reciting in unison, slow, reverent, and entirely without emotion. Her reports continued for 3 months. Then they stopped. The last entry in her logbook reads, "The arrangement has meaning. The 13th chair was not missing. It was waiting." Soon after, Boudreau vanished during a seasonal flood that swept through Jefferson. Her body was never found, but the journal floated back days later, waterlogged but legible. It was sealed away with the other artifacts. In 1932, the evidence room caught fire. Official cause: faulty wiring. Unofficially, investigators noted that the blaze began inside the locked cabinet that housed the ritual furniture. Everything within was reduced to ash, except the single unmarked chair, found upright amid the debris, its surface untouched by flame. Today, that chair sits in a climate-controlled vault beneath the parish courthouse. Its file is labeled Object 1843A, provenance unknown. The custodian on duty swears he hears something faint when the lights go out. A hum, soft as breath, rising from the grain of the wood. He says it almost sounds like a woman's voice, whispering a word that could be a name or a command. In 1947, Dr. Miriam Caldwell, a sociologist from Tulane University, began researching patterns of gendered indoctrination in postbellum orphan institutions. Her study led her to the parish archives, where she found mention of the House of Blessed Comfort, a line in a disintegrating 1858 ledger, followed by the word reclaimed. No one could tell her what it meant. The house no longer appeared on maps, and all official property records had been expunged during Reconstruction. But Caldwell was relentless. She interviewed old residents, combed through forgotten church ledgers, and eventually uncovered the fire reports from 1932, referencing Object 1843A. When she requested access to the item, the courthouse clerk refused. "That thing's not for research," he said. "It's for containment." Caldwell persisted, citing academic clearance. 2 days later, she was granted a 15-minute examination. According to her field diary, the chair was beautiful, though crude, carved with a patience that feels like prayer. She traced her fingers along its arms, studying tool marks that looked almost like script. Under the right light, she saw faint letters emerging from the sanded surface. Mother. That night, her tape recorder, a bulky wire spool model, captured a series of sounds at 3:17 a.m. A slow rhythm, like knuckles tapping wood, then a voice distant but distinct. "Do you see what I built?" Caldwell's assistant transcribed it, dismissing it as a residual echo from the machine. But when he rewound the tape the next morning, the voice was gone. The magnetic strip was blank. She returned to the vault the next week, but the chair had been moved. The custodian claimed it was sent to Baton Rouge for preservation. It never arrived. 3 months later, Caldwell resigned from Tulane, citing recurring dreams of circular rooms. She moved north and lived the rest of her life in silence. Her final letter, dated 1972, ends with a line historians still debate. She made wives because she couldn't make daughters. In 1986, during a renovation of the Jefferson Parish Courthouse, a janitor discovered a sealed wooden box behind a false wall in room 217, the long-disused evidence annex. It bore no inventory tag, only a burned-in marking. 1843A. Inside was the unmarked chair, warped with age yet intact. The varnish had darkened into a near-black sheen, and beneath the seat, someone had etched a new inscription in rough, uneven handwriting. They stood in a circle and waited to be named. The janitor. Clarence Duval told co-workers the wood was warm to the touch, like holding a sleeping animal. He called in the sheriff, who had the box transferred to the Historical Records Department for preservation. Within 48 hours, Duval suffered what doctors called an unexplained syncope event. He collapsed mid-sentence while describing the chair to a local journalist. When revived, he refused to speak again. The box was catalogued, then quietly moved to a state facility for restricted storage. But someone, likely a clerk, copied the inscription into the archive ledger and appended a note. Matches phrasing from Aurelia Klein's sermons, circa 1845-1848, St. Augustine Parish, Louisiana. No known recordings of Klein's voice exist. Yet in 1991, a batch of wax cylinder phonographs surfaced from a defunct seminary in Baton Rouge. Each was labeled with a single word: wife, renewal, offering. Experts confirmed the voice was female, the accent rural Creole, the tone rhythmic and liturgical. The third cylinder contained a single sentence repeated 12 times. You are purchased for holiness. Audio analysts noted that on the final repetition, a second voice entered, soft, younger, almost childlike, echoing the same line in perfect unison. The cylinders were sent to the Smithsonian for authentication, but the shipment never arrived. In the logbook, under condition upon transfer, someone had penciled one last line in the margin. The voices are still learning the words. In 2003, a late-night AM radio station out of Shreveport, WZLU 1030, aired a special called Forgotten Faiths of the American South. The host, an amateur folklorist named Dennis Harper, claimed he'd obtained a rare wax cylinder recording from a private collection in Baton Rouge, a woman preaching in a language that wasn't quite English. Listeners described the broadcast as hypnotic. Harper introduced the piece with casual skepticism, but within minutes his tone changed. The recording was faint, distorted by static, but between the hissing grooves came a rhythmic whisper. You are purchased for holiness. You are purchased for holiness. For several seconds, the audio dropped to silence. Then came a low hum, not mechanical but human. A chorus of voices joined, rising and falling in uncanny synchronization. At 2:13 a.m., the transmission abruptly cut off. The emergency tone played for 21 minutes before the station went dark. The next morning, state police found the studio door bolted from the inside. All electrical equipment had melted at the wiring, though no fire had occurred. Harper was discovered slumped in his chair, alive but catatonic, clutching a handwritten note. It read, "The circle is not metaphor, it breathes." The FCC classified the incident as a signal interference anomaly. The recording was confiscated and logged under Department of Communications file code I-1843H, a familiar pattern to those who had followed the old archives. But bootleg tapes circulated online, gaining cult status among sound archivists. Those who listened reported the same phenomenon. The hum deepened with every replay, and at the 13th repetition, a whisper emerged under the static. Sometimes it said, renewed. Other times, mother, but in a handful of recordings, verified. Time-stamped, it said something else entirely. A voice, childlike yet commandingly calm, whispered, "Say your vows." And then, silence. Within a month, Zelu's transmitter tower collapsed in a windless night. The local report called it an act of weathering. Those who lived nearby said it sounded more like breathing. In 2014, a graduate student at Louisiana State University named Leah Minter began researching female authority structures in Southern religious cults. While cataloging folklore for her dissertation, she stumbled upon the WZLU broadcast transcripts. The phrase "you are purchased for holiness" appeared repeatedly in listener accounts. Curious, she traced the broadcast's source code and discovered fragments of the original file still archived on the FCC's internal servers. Corrupted, but recoverable. She downloaded them onto her laptop, unaware that each file carried a hidden waveform signature. Within hours of playback, strange phenomena began, her external drives looping without command, her computer fan humming at rhythmic intervals, matching the cadence of the recorded chant. When she adjusted the spectrogram visualization, a shape appeared, 12 arcs arranged in a circle, with a hollow space in the center. Minter thought it was an encoding glitch. But when she layered the waveform with the frequency map of human speech, a pattern emerged. The blank center wasn't silence. It was absence, the frequency range of a missing 13th voice. 2 weeks later, Minter presented her findings at a digital humanities symposium. The audience reported that when she played the restored file, the projector screen flickered with faint text not present in her slides. A single word appeared and faded before anyone could capture it. Mother. That night, her department server room overheated and shut down. 26 hard drives fused. Minter's research was lost, except for a single PDF backup she had emailed to herself. Its metadata showed an edit time of 3:17 a.m. The file now contained an extra page, a transcript not written by her. They will not call it religion. They will call it progress. But the circle is never broken. Minter vanished from public record soon after, leaving her thesis unfinished. When investigators examined her apartment, they found 12 wooden chairs arranged in a perfect ring around her desk. The 13th space was empty. By 2017, the House of Blessed Comfort had become a half-forgotten legend in Louisiana folklore. A story whispered by archivists and historians who knew better than to publish. Yet within certain circles of academia and private faith societies, Aurelia Klein's name reappeared, not as a person, but as a principle. A non-profit organization calling itself the Aurelia Foundation for Domestic Renewal registered in Baton Rouge that year. Its stated mission: to restore the sanctity of family structure and traditional moral order. Its board of directors included former seminary instructors, a psychologist, and 2 executives from a private adoption network. The group's website featured an embossed seal, 12 petals surrounding an open circle. No one thought much of it until a whistleblower, a data analyst named Henry Paxton, leaked internal correspondence to a journalist. The emails described a program of ethical pairing between teenage wards and adult sponsors, couched in the language of mentorship and purity. Hidden among the attachments was a scanned document labeled Klein Protocol, 1843. It referenced ritualized preparation of selected subjects for Holy Union, with phrases identical to those transcribed from the old wax cylinders. When the journalist attempted to publish the story, her article was removed within 24 hours. The outlet later issued a vague retraction, citing unverified material, but copies spread across encrypted forums, where users began connecting the Foundation's emblem to images carved on the recovered chairs. Paxton, the whistleblower, went missing 3 days later. His car was found abandoned near the Jefferson Marsh, the same ground dredged in 1904. In the spring of 1856, A traveling cleric named Reverend Josiah Vale arrived in St. Augustine Parish, dispatched by the diocesan council to inspect rumors of unorthodox domestic worship among the remnants of the House of Blessed Comfort. The manor itself had long burned, its foundations swallowed by the marsh. Yet in the parish hall, Vale uncovered a small iron coffer sealed with wax and twine. Inside lay a ledger bound in lambskin, its pages inked in a thin feminine hand. The cover bore no title, only the inscription, "For those who were seated." Each entry was dated and signed A. Klein. The tone was neither confession nor diary, but instruction, as if addressed to unseen pupils. The pages described the ordering of obedience, wherein young wards were to be seated in a circle of 12, heads bowed, hands folded, while hymns of purchase and release were chanted. The 12th entry ended abruptly. When the final breath is drawn, seat her among her sisters, for rest is holiness. Vale's testimony, preserved in a diocesan memorandum dated August 1856, claimed the ledger's ink bled anew each dawn, darkening as though freshly written. He further reported that the church bell of St. Augustine tolled 13 times every night, that the book remained in his possession, though it was known to ring only 12. After his second week in the parish, the Reverend sealed the ledger within the church crypt and departed for New Orleans. He never reached it. His horse was found by the roadside, saddle intact, reins unbroken. The parish sent 2 men to retrieve the book. They returned pale and silent, refusing to speak of what they saw beneath the church floor. Their written report contained but one phrase. Repeated thrice, they were still seated. In the winter of 1858, the Diocese of New Orleans dispatched a second envoy to St. Augustine Parish, charged with concluding Reverend Vale's unfinished inquiry. The chosen investigator was Father Ambrose Lafferty, a man of cold temperament and unshakable reason, long accustomed to the whispers of backwater superstition. Lafferty arrived on the Feast of Candlemas. The air hung heavy with decay, the marsh water stood still and black as ink. The villagers greeted him with wary courtesy, but refused to speak of the burned manor or the circle of widows said to meet by the river bank at dusk. They crossed themselves when the name Klein was mentioned. Within a week, Lafferty secured entry to the church crypt where Reverend Vale's sealed coffer was said to rest. He broke the wax, opened the lid, and found the ledger of the seated precisely as Vale described, pages unstained by mold, the ink vivid as if written yesterday. He wrote in his travel notes, "The words appear to respond to touch. When light falls upon them, they darken, then pale again as if drawing breath." That night he remained in the rectory to pray. At the 12th stroke of the bell, the candles guttered and the sound of wooden chairs scraping stone echoed beneath the floor. The priest descended with lantern in hand, believing it to be vandals. He was found the next morning, seated upright in the crypt, hands clasped upon his knees, eyes open but unseeing. Around him 12 chairs stood in a perfect ring. The ledger lay open at his feet, a fresh line inscribed across its final page. "The circle is restored." Lafferty's death was ruled apoplexy. The parish sealed the crypt once more and placed a marble slab over the stair. In later years, masons working on the church foundation reported hearing faint tapping from beneath the floor. Slow, deliberate, rhythmic. The head mason recorded it in his logbook with a single Latin phrase, "Sedis tenentur." The seats are occupied. By 1863, the Church of St. Augustine stood in partial ruin. Federal troops had passed through the parish the previous spring, requisitioning its grounds for quarters. The soldiers removed the marble slab covering the crypt to store ammunition beneath, unaware of the warnings recorded in diocesan files. On the night of June 7th, a sentry named Private Ezra Dole heard movement below and descended with a lantern. His companion remained above. Moments later, Dole shouted that the chamber was not empty, though his words were muffled as if carried from a great distance. Then silence. When the hatch was reopened at dawn, the crypt lay undisturbed save for Dole's rifle upright against the wall. The marble slab had shifted several inches, though no marks of leverage were found. Captain Rutledge, commanding officer, ordered the crypt resealed and posted a guard. His official report, preserved in regimental archives, includes this note: "An odor of myrrh, faint yet distinct, issued from the stair. It was not unpleasant but unnatural for such a place. After the war, parishioners sought to reconsecrate the grounds. A new priest, Father Arnaud de Laurier, supervised the work. When masons pried the slab loose for cleaning, they found the surface inscribed, not by tool, but by some corrosive agent that had eaten letters into the stone. The message ran in a circle. When the seed is empty, the song begins anew. De Laurier ordered the slab buried in the marsh to remove it from holy ground. The wagon carrying it sank halfway to its destination. The driver, overcome by fumes, claimed to hear women's voices counting softly as if for a hymn. The slab was abandoned where it fell. Years later, children fishing nearby spoke of a pale shimmer beneath the water, shaped like a wheel. Local lore calls it La Table des âmes, the Table of Souls. None who touched its surface twice ever sang again. In the autumn of 1871, reports began to reach the Diocese of New Orleans concerning a group of wanderers traveling the parish roads under the title Daughters of Renewal. They were women dressed in plain linen, barefoot and carrying no possessions save small wooden chairs slung upon their backs by leather cords. Witnesses along the Bayou des Chênes described their procession as silent yet orderly, moving always in 12s. At dusk, they would halt beside an abandoned chapel or farmhouse, form a circle, and remain seated until sunrise. None accepted charity. None spoke. When approached, they bowed their heads and whispered a single phrase in unison: "We wait for the 13th. The St. Landry Gazette published a column calling them lunatics of the old faith, but several accounts came from reputable observers, school teachers, merchants, and one Union veteran, each confirming the same gesture of the circle and the same low hum like a psalm without words. By winter, the group vanished, leaving only 12 chairs stacked neatly within the ruin of the former Church of St. Augustine. The chairs were carved from cypress and bore faint initials on the underside, AC, the mark long associated with Aurelia Klein, the diocesan clerk who inventoried the objects, wrote in his margin: "The wood is damp yet unrotted. A faint vibration persists when touched." He recommended burning them at once, but the order was never carried out. The chairs were stored in the vestry cellar, and within a fortnight the priest fell ill with paralysis of the tongue, unable to speak or swallow. Before his death, he scrawled upon a scrap of sermon paper, "They pray through wood." After that, the remaining chairs were lost to a flood that swept through the parish in 1872. Only one fragment survived, a single armrest retrieved from the mud, carved with a word half erased by water: restored. The final known reference to the House of Blessed Comfort appears in the Diocesan Annual Report of 1879, filed by Canon Jean-Luc Moreau, then custodian of ecclesiastical properties in the western parishes. His memorandum, preserved in brittle onion-skin copy, bears the simple heading, "Concerning certain remains in Jefferson Marsh." De Moreau records that, after successive floods receded, fragments of foundation stone had risen through the silt where the manor once stood. The villagers called the place Terre des Voix, Land of Voices. He and 2 assistants rowed out by skiff to examine the site on a calm September morning. In his notes he writes, "The ground exhales warmth though the air is cool. One feels a vibration as of distant organs. The water moves without wind. Among the stones lay the armrest marked restored, half buried yet dry to the touch. When lifted, it released a scent of cedar and candle wax, though no resin remained." Moreau ordered the fragment wrapped in linen and conveyed to the parish house. That evening he attempted to draft his formal report, but found the ink upon his page thickening to pitch. His hand cramped. The pen scored the paper without mark. He closed with a trembling line later copied by his successor. The circle sleeps beneath the flood, but the chairs are never empty. Soon after, Moreau retired from clerical duty, citing weakness of the nerves. He died within the year. The fragment disappeared from diocesan storage during the transfer of archives to Baton Rouge. Only his closing annotation remains. In faded brown ink at the foot of the ledger's final page, Finis Domus Beatae Consolationis. Thus ends the House of Blessed Comfort. Yet parish pilgrims claim that on still evenings, the marsh near Jefferson hums softly, as if many voices were holding one long note in perfect accord, waiting, patient and unseen.